I can't. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather, professional as always. And I'm excited. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about Alfie Kohn. And the people here with me to talk about Alfie Kohn are Emma Tempest. Hello. And Lisa Murphy.
Hello.
And Richard Kohn.
Hello.
And Elizabeth Liz Nolasco.
Hello.
And I'm laughing already because I have to stories that I think are funny. You can decide. But so Alfie, Lisa and I have a rich history arguing over Alfie Kohn. And about 4 years ago at about this time was my first ever podcast appearance. I was a guest on the Child Care Bar and Grill, and I didn't know you or Jeff at all. It was like an email. I emailed Jeff a question and he was like, oh, come on and talk about it. And I remember in that conversation, I threatened you or challenged you to a fight over Alfie Kohn. And last night you suggested he might sometime hear this episode and I was totally freaked out. No, he can never hear it.
Why do you think I put lipstick on? Just in case he finds us on the YouTube.
Just in case he finds us. And so we agreed not to make any jokes about threesomes with Alfie, just in case he finds us on the internet and listens. So
because he probably has a Google set up that
when he gets alerts when his name comes up.
Like, oh, what's this about? Oh,
okay. Well, we mean that in a very professional sense, like we'd study together or something. I think
right.
Kind of threesome we're discussing.
Sounds legit.
So, and also Lisa taunts me that she texts him regularly. But hey guys, let's talk about Alfie Kohn in a completely normal and not deranged kind of way.
Can we do a quick round robin? First time you ever heard about him, like time frame, or
that's a great idea. Yeah. You want to start?
Well, Bev, that's how I learned about a lot of people back in the early 90s. Bev said, read this book. And so I read Punished by Rewards. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Bev Boz was still holding up, Richard, you remember this, the cards? Remember, like before PowerPoint, she'd have these like cards that she'd hold up and temporary compliance, and I was like, that's interesting. I really wasn't raised in a A's, praise, bribey kind of fashion, nor did I really teach like that, but I of course read the book, so that was mine. So early 90s.
Yeah. Richard,
you go next.
Your turn.
Okay, what she said.
Oh, and there we go. Emma.
I can't think of a time, but I know who it was. It was my friend Joe, who was my teaching assistant back in England, and so that must have been like maybe 2014, so not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. You might be the freshest Alfie fan.
Chicken.
Okay, Liz, how about you?
I found a copy of The Homework Myth on the free card at the library.
On the free card?
Got just lucky. And that was probably 2010, 2011, and then immediately bought all of his other books.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I came across Punished by Rewards, but that was my first experience with Alfie's work. And it was probably early 2000s for me, but I wish I could remember why. But I do remember it being one of those, of course, lots of new stuff, and I learned so much from reading that book, but also it was this is why I have that uneasy feeling about behavior charts, or this is why I have that discomfort with carrot and stick.
You put it into words for you.
Things. Yes. Yeah. And I have since, of course, the book was very highlighted, and I've given it away and bought new copies and but that's not where my quote comes from for today. I went with a different book for my quote because I couldn't pick just one from Punished by Rewards.
Right. I was the same. I was looking at like all 10 of my books of my Alfie shelf. Like he's got a whole shelf. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so I flipped through like, where were the ones that initially, like, I'm not going to dig for something obscure, just to be clever. Mm-hmm. But I will say this before we get to the quotes. I know that I'm a big proponent of unpacking the idea of structure versus control. And it's a big pushback that I give to people, because usually when they're talking about a structured environment, it's very much controlling. As I flipped through a couple of these books, I was like, maybe he's who planted those seeds so many years ago. Like, dude's got whole chapters on the difference between the two. And like, even in my old writing, I know how my handwriting has changed. Like even way back then, I was like, this is the difference between structure and control. So clearly that was something I locked onto even, like a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember being in a used bookstore with my kids 4 or 5 years ago, and Curtis bought The Case Against Competition just on his own. And that was like the proudest mother moment. We're passing it on to the next generation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So who wants to go first with their quote? Who wants to start?
I nominate Liz.
Oh,
Ooh.
because she blew our minds with Mem Fox and the quote.
Right. So let's get right to that
Let's
shit
get
right
right to
now in the
Liz.
beginning.
Oh, good. Well, this is from The Myth of the Spoiled Child, which I just
Forgot about that one.
love.
Mhm.
Well, because you gave me your copy when you I mean, I'm sure you have another,
I
but
do. Yes, I do.
many people find it extremely upsetting that anyone might receive something desirable, a sum of money, a trophy, a commendation, without having done enough to deserve it. It's outrageous, we're told, that some children get awards, gold stars, and happy face stickers for the most routine accomplishments of childhood.
Mm-hmm. And what do we think about that?
True.
I just don't want to take over the conversation because I clearly can on this with this, but but that's another example of something that that blew my mind, the myth of the spoiled child, when he sort of connected it to capitalism and the idea that you can't get something for nothing, and you have to earn love and attention, and getting your needs met needs to be earned sometimes, and that's where this idea of spoiling children comes from. That was also big for me.
I wonder if Tamar Jacobson has read the Myth of the Spoiled Child.
Well,
that would be interesting to filter it through her attention.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that something for nothing is so prevalent in classrooms. Sorry to interrupt.
In what?
Oh, no, you're not at all. Something for nothing.
Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Oh, it's just super prevalent in teacher ideology. I mean, I think even in teacher training programs, right, we're all still taught this crazy Skinner behaviorism, or at least I was. I don't know.
Yeah. I have a friend who teaches ed psychology, and she really doesn't like Alfie Kohn. And I think that's part of why, because he challenges so much of what we learn when we take an educational psychology class. Richard, say something.
Well, this very much to me brings Bev back into my mind and heart. One of them, we already did our Bev recording, and we could have gone on for hours, but one of her many contributions was originally called the 11 Conditions for the Development of Self-Esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And then she hooked into Alfie Kohn, and she started realizing, oh, wait, self-esteem is not the Holy Grail. And even if it were, it's not, you don't get it unearned. You get it through your action and your own sense of accomplishment. And so she changed it to the 11 Conditions for Healthy Human Growth. And that all, to me, relates to Liz's quote.
So you mentioned that when we recorded about Bev Boz, of course, and I Googled it and I can't find it anywhere.
Can't find what?
The 11 conditions.
I have it written down in that file folder right there. So I can hook you up when we're done.
So we need to get that out to listeners somehow. But yeah.
And Richard, if I can add to that, I love how she started. I know this isn't about Bev, but if I can toss the 2 cents in, that the 11 conditions, the only place where they happen organically is when kids are playing. I mean, I took that and ran with it. Right. Even way back then, I was like, look, everybody, because even before she did the change, like self-esteem was the bandwagon that everybody was on, right? And so you take that language, you're like, if you want this is what has to happen. So like we were trying to make the just let them play argument even before we changed like self-esteem and human growth and development. Like even before that, the message still was one of let the kids play.
Uh-huh.
And I guess I would bring that to maybe reconnect that back to Alfie by saying, play is its own reward.
Correct.
You don't need to give kids a sticker for playing well.
Oh my God, you played so good today.
Yeah.
Let me give you a sticker. Bad teaching doesn't just happen. It's practically demanded by systematic factors.
Ooh, what's that one from?
The schools our children deserve.
Oh yeah, read it again. Say it again,
Oh,
please.
shoot. Okay, hold on. Bad teaching doesn't just happen. It's practically demanded by systematic factors.
Okay.
That was
so.
quote number 1.
Yeah.
Again, I'm ready in case we hit a dead spot of talking, but now that I see Richard is here with us, that's not going to
We're not going to have a dead spot.
Right back at you, Lisa.
You started to say something, I think, there, Richard. What were you going to say?
I am always starting to say something. That's a lifestyle choice for me.
Sure.
I need a shirt that says that.
So far, this morning's recording sessions have been snippets that we're writing down to use in the future. So. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that Lisa, the quote that Lisa read relates directly back to what Liz was talking about and what you were talking about the people teaching educational psychology who are unwilling to look at, the kind of wisdom and logic that Alfie shares. That's the beginning of the systems that Lisa's quote refers to, is the way we educate our new early childhood professionals and bring them into the field.
Mm-hmm.
So a quote that I don't have, it wasn't in a book, but I've heard him speak a couple of times. Terrific teachers have teeth marks on their tongues, which I think is beautiful. And this isn't a quote per se, but it was more of a temperament, maybe perhaps an attitude that he brought to his lecturing. He appears, again, I saw evidence of this in one lecture, to loathe the rah early childhood, and it makes sense, but like, early childhood people are the best people ever. Woo! And he's like, why do you guys stand up and clap when people do that to you? And I was like, and that's when I fell in love with him. So it's not a quote, but it was definitely an attitude.
Yeah, but why? What was did he go into his reasoning?
Well, he was doing a punished by rewards lecture, so I'm sure he tied it back in. I would be lying if I tried to elaborate on what the connection was. I was just so impressed that somebody called that shit out, because I loathe that. I hate that stuff. And so to have somebody else acknowledge it that I had, so much respect for, I felt, as a young speaker at that time, I felt very affirmed that my to that kind of attitude when people were talking about us as a profession, that it was not it wasn't off target.
Yeah.
That somebody else kind of felt the same way.
I think most professions act that way in like a conference setting, though. Someone starts that cheer and everyone joins in. I think we have to explain to listeners why we are uncomfortable with that.
He has a blog post about it, because I read it in looking for this. It's called How Not to Get a Standing Ovation at a Teacher's Conference. It's from October 2019.
Oh, it's recent.
That's a good one to read.
Yeah.
I had the same reaction. I was like, oh.
Well, I will just point out that sorry to deeply disagree.
Yeah.
Perhaps I haven't read the article or the blog post, but my most popular keynote is early childhood professionals, the heroes of our time. But I think if I had to guess where he's going with that and where Lisa goes with that, the difference is that my keynotes aren't me talking. They're the people in the audience explaining why someone else in the room is a hero to them. And so they're personalizing it.
Sure.
Oh yeah, I think that's different, Richard. I think that's different.
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
I do 100% think that's different. I don't think anybody present, I'm looking at 4 other faces here. I don't think any of us would stand up in front of the room and be all, that rah.
You're not that great. None of you are that great. That's what we'll say.
Well, hold on though. Is that maybe how listeners are interpreting like the opposite of what I'm saying? I think to me, it's condescending. It's a condescending attitude.
Yeah.
That to me, I can't stand it.
If you want,
Can I take it back?
Ooh.
Say again.
Hold on.
Sorry, go ahead, Emma.
Liz, you just got so loud. Hold on. Emma, go.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So from
Don't forget Liz.
the post, he says, I don't think it's wrong to offer some affirmation and appreciation to people who don't get nearly enough of it, but I'm not sure a speaker's or writer's talents are best used for telling people what they want to hear and already believe. I think
Okay.
it's that kind of, yes, you are awesome, and yes, you do this so good, but what are we going to do about it? There's still that extra step.
Okay. Okay. Liz,
Well,
what were you
let's
going to
take
say?
that back to early childhood and young children, which is one of the things that we know from Bev and from Alfie is how problematic praise is. And so what I'm hearing you all talk about regarding adults, but completely relates to our work with young children, is the emptiness of praise when it hasn't been earned, or when it's not or when there's no authentic acknowledgement for what that human being has done,
Right.
that is praiseworthy.
Right. No specific reason to be giving the feedback. It's just, I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
So in that sense, it's the same for adults as it is for young children.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
the logic behind it.
Yeah. Okay, Liz, go quick before anyone else starts talking.
Right, I'm going to get really loud again. I don't think I changed my volume, but tell me if I'm way off. If I could jump back to that capitalism, something for nothing, and early childhood being generally undervalued, I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find the rah-rah thing at like an electrical engineering conference.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. Maybe it's just
so
professions that are predominantly women that we
predominantly
get
women
that.
and predominantly undervalued.
So capitalism and patriarchy.
Yes.
But also we all are have just been and are living through this experience of, oh, wait, we're not essential workers.
Yeah.
Thank you to all this other list of people, but childcare and early education doesn't get mentioned. But those other people who need to go save those lives can't get to their work unless we're there taking care of their children.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. If you really want to appreciate us,
we're living through
really do it.
One of the hardest, most illustrative lessons of how undervalued we are.
Yeah.
We've always talked about it abstractly, but now the pandemic is, we're now seeing it for what it is.
Yeah.
You're awesome. Here's some candy.
Right. That's all we're asking.
Right.
Oh my God.
Just throw us some
with
treats.
the name of your preschool on it.
Look, more crap from the vendor hall. It's free.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Who wants to go next with a quote?
Well, Liz, was there more you wanted to say about capitalism?
Oh yeah.
Always, but I
Always.
specific.
Like her.
I think just the undervalued. I think there's so much of needing to build ourselves up, and I feel like we hold more of our identity with the profession than a lot of other fields. And I think that's true of education as a whole. And I think early education is particularly burdened with it because we need to convince other people of our value. Sometimes we need to convince ourselves of our value. And there's just so much weight, and we're looking for that praise and validation that comes from the, even the empty praise, even the yay early childhood educators, just because it doesn't happen.
Right.
So I just
how would the listeners connect that to capitalism?
Oh, sorry, just undervalued and, low wages and that sort of low social standing. And
Got it. That makes sense to me. Yeah, thank you.
What were you going to say, Lisa?
I was going to say that just to what Liz just said, if we as a profession identify so much, perhaps even more than other professions with our job. And so we're always not just saying that our profession is worthy, but then our own self is worthy. That's, yeah. So this has been another episode of, come on, somebody bring it up again.
No, next quote. Who's going?
Well, it's a long one.
Okay.
And it's kind of changing the direction, but are you ready?
Sure.
Some parents essentially mortgage their children's present to the future, sacrificing what might bring meaning or enjoyment, or even produce higher quality learning in a ceaseless effort to prepare their children for college. They are not raising a child so much as a resume on legs.
Oh. Okay, agree.
Right.
So what I hear in that is process versus product. Right.
Yeah,
we're not respecting the process of learning and growing and expanding your knowledge. We're all, parents are conditioned to work towards that future product, which is a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that myth has long since been busted, but most people don't know that.
Exactly. Policymakers see students mostly as test scores, valuing only those who get the best numbers and therefore not really valuing any of them at all.
Oh, yes.
I guess this is going to be just me going, oh, every time.
Well, one of the things I like best about this book, the What Does It Mean to Be Well Educated book, is that it's a nice crash course for anyone who's brand new. I think to Alfie, the idea of, the one chapter that's 5 reasons to stop saying good job. I think that's a really nice way to get people to go, you give them punished by rewards and they're like, but here's 5 reasons to stop saying that.
Yeah, which is also an article that you can get on his website. Like you can download that 5 reasons to stop saying good job. I want to jump and let Emma say something if she wants to.
I'm writing.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. Never mind. Okay, I'm going to read my quote.
Please.
So this is from Beyond Discipline, From Compliance to Community, which is the first book of Alfie's that really started getting me in trouble at work.
Okay.
Because I started.
Is it as highlighted as mine is?
it's no, but this is the second copy that just did it. So the first copy had much more. This was my start over and think about it again at a different point in my career copy. But anyway, so he says here, children are not just adults in the making. They are people whose current needs and rights and experiences must be taken seriously. They ought to be able to make choices because people of any age ought to have some say in what happens to them. And it doesn't seem like the idea of children as humans with rights should be so mind-blowing, but to hear someone say it, to read someone say it is powerful. And then to try and take that idea into conversations about discipline and
even caregiving in general.
Compliance. Yeah. So
especially now with the corona times, who's asking kids what they want to do? Like, is anybody even considering them in terms of like going back to school? If they want to go back, what do they want to do instead? Do they want to wear a mask? Do they not want to wear a mask? Is anyone actually asking the children?
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point, Emma.
Right. I imagine that a lot of the children are feeling some fear because they've spent the last several months hearing about why we can't go outside and why we can't be in school and why we can't be together. And now we're just, like, I had a Facebook friend really celebrating that one of the school corporations was going to just in-person, same old kind of classes. And they were celebrating because now they have their life back. Their kids can go to school. But I just kept thinking, how scary would that be? And just what you said, Emma, who's asking them how they feel about it? I don't think probably anybody.
This quote also brings up for me another influencer that that early childhood nerd chose to completely ignore and not do an episode on.
Can we guess?
No, this isn't the trivia night that will
damn it.
televised.
That will never see the light of day.
I used to read. No, Erickson.
Oh. Do you know why he wasn't included in the influencers? Nobody suggested him or no one signed up for him. That wasn't.
I suggested him and there was no sign up.
So that's not a nerd decision.
The people can watch the videos so they can see my head.
So Erickson, I love Erickson. What are you going to say about him?
Well, he talked about autonomy versus shame and doubt, right? And so we know that need for power, that say-so, is so important in the toddler and early preschool years. And the quote that was just read to me speaks directly to that, that being ignored. It's like swimming upstream. If you know that's their primary motivator, why wouldn't you respect and embrace that and utilize that?
Because we have people who enter the profession because the only power that they have is bossing young children around.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Was that a let me talk, Emma, or was that just an agreement?
No, she was giving me an amen is what she
Right. We have a lot of deeply disempowered folks.
Yeah.
And undereducated folks caring for our country's children.
Yeah. who also don't always recognize their right to have a choice, to speak up, to have a voice, and just sort of assume that they don't have any say in how we're doing things with children. So it's like
Or it's
layers and layers of
I don't have
disempowerment.
a say.
Oh, sure. Sometimes it is just
Yeah.
easier to think that. Yeah.
Well, and let's all just point out, just to put it out there, at least from appearance's sake, for anyone who's watching this video, we appear to be a group of white people having this
Yes.
conversation.
Yes, that is what we look
Field
like.
is often, primarily, people of color and poverty. And that's part of this, that's a major thread of what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was just trying to think because, and it's sort of going back in a different direction, but I started to read and I didn't finish it, but it's John Holt, and it's a book about the rights of childhood. And like one of the first chapters is children should have a right to vote. And I was like, what? But that's that. And conversations we've had repeatedly about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the United States hasn't ratified it yet. It's just there doesn't seem to be any consensus that children have rights, and there seems to be a lot of shock when we use that language, a lot of discomfort with adults to consider that children should have the same kind of rights that we want to have.
Well, I think because we haven't ratified it, it's hard to use the concept of it being a right as leverage.
Yeah.
Mm.
And just
we can't go back to it. We can't say, look, here's a regulation that says that we can't do that.
Yeah.
We'll use it, but unlike other countries, there's nothing actually in writing that we can use to our advantage.
Sure.
And that's often why it's not that I avoid using that language. I'll often try and steer conversation away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sole rationale for that.
Yeah. So I want to give Liz and Emma a chance because they're not as bossy as the rest of us about jumping into the conversation.
I'm listening.
Oh, okay. Is it time for the next quote? Who else has a quote?
I have a quote.
Okay, go.
I don't know what book it's from.
God damn it, Richard.
Sorry. It's from I'm Never Gonna Have a Romance with Heather or Lisa.
It's the article.
It was a book. Or maybe it was a blog.
It's a whole book.
It's a whole book on it.
Highlight it.
It's a textbook.
All right, let's hear it.
All right. It's interesting. This is the quote from that book. If I offered you $1,000 to take off your shoes, which again has no relation to Lisa, you'd very likely accept. And then I could triumphantly announce that rewards work. But as with punishments, they can never help someone develop a commitment to a task or action, a reason to keep doing it when there's no longer a payoff.
Yeah.
This
Right?
took a dark turn.
I can't even because somebody else talk because I'm still recovering from Alfie paying me $1,000 to take my shoes off.
I would contribute to that GoFundMe. Oh, you know what I always say to teachers is the ones who love the red, yellow, and green, and the stickers, and the, all those external, right? I mean, this is where I feel like, or I hope we five get to talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, right? Because if you motivate young children with something outside of themselves, like a sticker, or God forbid, a cookie, right? Footnote, see obesity epidemic in our country, in our world.
Candy.
Right, candy for doing something good. You get a Skittle. But the thing I always say to teachers to try to make that really just sort of simple and obvious is, you love these kids. We know that. You want the best for them long after they've left you, and maybe you've been forgotten and they've gone on in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
If you're relying on that sticker or that red, yellow, and green chart, and next year they get to Miss Debbie's class and she doesn't use that, what's their incentive to do? Because yes, those things can appear to work, I'm about to get possibly 2 new dogs, and we, as much as I hate it, we have an invisible fence that has the little shock collar.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it works. It appears to. And spanking appears to work in the short term.
Yeah.
It stops a behavior when it's associated with pain, or perhaps keeps a behavior going if it's associated with a reward. But what happens when those rewards and punishments stop? And next year they're with a different teacher who doesn't have a red, yellow, and green chart. They don't have the intrinsic. They haven't learned, they haven't found it within themselves to make those choices not to grab the truck away. Because, and this sort of connects back to our other early childhood nerd podcast about moral development in a weird, which isn't that intrinsic motivation to know that you shouldn't grab the truck from the other child.
Also, spoiler alert, if the next class does have a red, yellow, green chart, it still doesn't work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're not saying the answer is for everybody to have a chart so that it's consistent. Yeah, I think it's impossible to record to talk about Alfie Kohn without getting into this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and the whole idea of rewards, because people will, even when I present it with that sort of an example, like, you know, it may stop them from doing the thing now, but down the road, if we take those extrinsic things away, what reason do they have to continue with the quote unquote good behavior? And then people have said to me, well, it doesn't matter because in the moment they didn't do the thing I didn't want them to do. And especially in a system where kids move from one room to the next every year, starting at birth and just continuing that way forever, then that it's so easy to get into that short term thinking. Oh, what's it say, Lisa?
This?
No.
The only thing between a carrot and a stick is a jackass.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yes, got it.
He tells a story. That's actually why I was flipping through the book again, because I didn't want to ruin it, but nor do I really want to paraphrase it and then get it wrong. But I believe in Punished by Rewards, he tells an amazing story about an old man who was being taunted by the neighborhood kids. So he started paying them, and then they stopped taunting him, showing how actually the reward often has the complete opposite. And Dan Hodgins talks about, and we should have had him on here. Dan Hodgins talks about a couple of studies that have actually been done that if you are constantly rewarding to that degree, you actually develop very self-centered, selfish tendencies.
Right. Right. And in Punished by Rewards, he talks about not just using this system with children, but using it with employees.
Yeah.
And, you know, basing bonuses on performance reviews and those kinds of things, because that's what happens. It doesn't build the community. It doesn't build that intrinsic motivation to do what we know is right for children. It builds, you know, this bubble of competition and protecting yourself.
I once worked somewhere that had a treasure box for adults.
Oh my God.
I worked at a school where we were paid $20 if we could recite the memorized mission statement at every staff meeting.
Yep. I've done that one too. Not $20, but I got points and prizes, probably tickets for a prize box, if I could say the mission statement.
To get one of those little plastic squigglies that you throw against the wall and then you watch it come.
I mean, which I love, but I also know how to buy those myself. I don't mean.
But I would throw out again that in some cultures and communities, right, particularly in the Black community, they are raised on, many of those folks are raised on generations of obedience or survival.
Yeah.
True.
Right. And so folks I've worked with can tell me very passionately and what appears to be logically why they whoop, right, or spank their children with the hairbrush in their purse. Because I need my son to behave in order to survive.
That's true.
Because in a few years he's going to be a teenager, and if he's not obedient, he's going to possibly. We've seen, we're living.
So that's an interesting conversation, Richard. That would it's probably a story for another time, of the disconnect potentially between, let's say, a white woman facilitating an early childhood setting, and if I have a predominance of people of color or the culture that might be doing that, the disconnect between me thinking that I am providing a very open, conversational-based, play-based, problem-solvingness kind of space that completely flies in the face of the culture of the families that are in that. So imagine the conversations that need to happen that prevent or try to prevent the disconnect, right? And attention between what's happening at school versus what's happening at home.
And the
wow.
listening on our part that needs to happen during those.
Which doesn't mean I'm going to whip out a hairbrush out of my purse, you know, and smack your kid with it. But it does mean that we have to find some kind of middle ground, because there is a disconnect between perhaps the home environment and the school environment. Even though I'm thinking that, perhaps naively, that what I'm doing is in the highest and best interest for all the kids who are here, but not realizing that there's a huge cultural influence that, let's be honest, I can't perhaps allow in this space.
Right.
But we can seek to understand it.
I can seek to understand it, most definitely.
Work for that third space.
And understand the generations, as you should, Richard, that are influencing how and where and why this came from. Am I going to like unravel that for that particular family? Probably not, but I can increase my understanding of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, not too long ago, now I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, Ijuma Jordan,
yeah,
taught Heather and I a lesson. I'll say taught only because I sort of really spent a long time putting myself in that kind of humble position of being a lifelong learner when I first wanted to resist what she was saying to us. But she said that one of the problems in early childhood education, of course I'm paraphrasing, is that when we try to teach developmentally appropriate practice or best practices, we tend to universalize our message. And universalizing is a sign of white supremacy, because we assume that what we're saying is best applies to all.
To everybody.
True.
But for example, in the cultures we're talking about, one of the differences is present time orientation versus future time orientation, right? So we can talk about how the relationship, we know it now, there's scads of evidence between spanking a young child and what happens 10 to 12 years later when they're a teenager, and the increase in drug use, gang membership, pregnancy, all those kinds of things. But the folks we're talking to are just trying to get through the moment or the day and put food on the table, and can't prioritize what life might be like in 10 years.
I'm wondering though, we're changing the subject, but this is okay. Are there people speaking to that? I don't want to use the wrong language. Are there people speaking to those communities about finding the middle ground between, not just spanking, but finding middle ground between the present lens and the future lens? Like, who's having that conversation? And
that involves moving through, I mean, you can't rush somebody else through Maslow. If people are scared for the lives of their children, they're down at that safety level. You can't.
Right.
Valid.
Push them forward, push them through.
I was just curious if there was somebody out there who that was like if they were dancing between that or having that conversation with people about, you know, we realize you are here and, you know, we're not telling you to hurry up, Maslow. And are we still able to acknowledge that there is tomorrow and next year and next week? Or is that completely probably not heard if you're down here, you know?
I also would really like to look at the bias.
Oh, I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead.
Just sorry, the connection that you had made between the spanking and then the negative repercussions of spanking, you know, being linked to higher instances of drug use and gang affiliation, like you said. I'm wondering if poor policing and poor methodology might actually be behind some of those links. We know that Black children, Black teenagers, Black young adults are more likely to be convicted of these things, more likely to be in circumstances that lead them to legal trouble. And I'm worried that these are biased studies, having not read them, and now I want to go down that rabbit hole and look into it more.
Good point.
Okay. No.
Alfie's going to be like, yo, this is not about me at all.
Right.
When he finds this on-
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to answer Lisa's question, which is, I feel like I've spent my career doing that dance.
Okay.
Like as a Pacific Oaks anti-bias flag waver. But as a white male, I'm the wrong person to be doing that dance.
Mhm.
That's what that's where I was going. Who's the right person?
Mhm.
Anyone but me.
Anyone.
Well, and
Yeah.
Not it.
Right.
Not
Yeah. I don't think it's this screen.
it's not the
But I do
screen.
think we have colleagues of color who are doing that work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure that they are. Yeah. Okay. Well, does anybody have a quote that we didn't get to?
I do. But
Okay,
it's like,
good.
it like pales in comparison to everything we just spoke about. But I'll say it anyway.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Punishment and reward proceed from basically the same psychological model, one that conceives of motivation as nothing more than the manipulation of behavior. This is not to say that behaviorists fail to distinguish between the two. In fact, Skinner argued fervently against the use of punishment in most circumstances, but the theory of learning and ultimately the view of what it is to be a human being are not significantly different for someone who says, do this and you'll get that, and someone who says, do this or here's what will happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that he brings to us that punishment and discipline are essentially the same thing. I mean, punishment and rewards are essentially the same thing, have the same kinds of effects over long-term motivation or short-term compliance.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they're fear-based, right?
They're both fear-based.
They're afraid of getting something painful or afraid of not getting something wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, Emma, I think the quote is really powerful. It goes right back to some of these other quotes and what we talked about of the systemic problems
Mm-hmm.
of the way we teach young teachers, educational psychology, who start and end with Skinner and don't go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
So can we acknowledge the 80-pound elephant in the room or 800-pound elephant?
Is it me?
No. It was the last time I actually had a conversation with Alfie was why I dropped out of my first master's degree program, because it was why special children who are in special needs classrooms somehow are not exempt from this mindset. And I'm like, I can't be a part of this program, and I left it.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, everything he says is fine for typically developing children, but none of it applies to children in special needs classrooms. And I'm like, I can't sleep at night and acknowledge this.
Yes.
I can't.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I suggested that just because a child has a diagnosis does not mean that they don't still learn in the ways that we know children learn best, and was accused of not supporting special ed because that's what I had suggested. And it's sorry, the whole prevalence of behaviorism for children who have, some sort of special need doesn't sit well with me, but it's a very entrenched mindset and practice.
Yep.
Well, and again, it goes back to the education of the people in those fields.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They go into special education rather than going into early childhood education. They take those educational psychology classes.
Mm-hmm.
They learn about, the rat who gets the pellet when they press their nose to the button.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's twice you've done that in this podcast, Lisa.
I know. It's all I think about. Whenever I think of Skinner, that's all that comes in my head. Good dog. Good dog. Here's your biscuit.
Yeah.
You did it when you were talking about Alfie Kohn, too.
Well, yeah, I did, didn't I? But for a whole different reason.
Right. But I've had people, I had a person specifically when I was doing a summer camp for school age kids, and I was talking about, getting the staff ready, and someone was like, well, have you ever watched The Dog Whisperer? Because I think that some of that could really be applied to working with children. No, I probably won't do that way.
Right.
I think when I first read this book and was talking about it when I worked in a school setting, the thing for me was that the motivation factor, a lot of people use it as oh, well, they're motivated to get the reward. And it's like, well, shouldn't they be motivated to do the behavior for the greater good of humankind? Like,
Yeah.
like the reward, I always compare it, like speaking of 800-pound elephants in the room,
Yeah.
I always compare it to like losing weight and having like a certificate when you lose 7 pounds or whatever. And the certificate is not what people are aiming for. They're aiming to lose weight. The certificate is that it's not the reward, it's the acknowledgement that, yeah, you're doing well, as per se. But when it comes to children, they don't give a crap about some certificate that says you weren't on the red all week, or you didn't, you know, miss any playtime because you only hit Johnny once instead of 10 times. It's just, the whole thing is bullshit. And my coach, one of my favorite, can we swear on this one?
Oh yeah, I think we already have.
Okay, good. One of my favorite quotes from her is, motivation is the fuckboy of emotions. Because it's just so true. It's so true. You don't, if you're looking to be motivated to do something, you're just not going to do it. You're going to lose the interest in it. It comes from wanting to do it, and that is not the same as being motivated.
Right. Or as soon as whatever that reward isn't interesting anymore, you have to do bigger rewards and get trickier with your methods for rewarding. And
so do we need to link this to mask wearing right now?
Oh, you sure can.
Ooh.
Let's hear it.
Well, it just jumped in my head.
But we're 7 minutes away from being an hour. So
I think it's that thing that you said about independence and interdependence on other people. So
Emma's, your phrase about doing it for the greater good versus, you know, that's when it jumped in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doing an independent act for the community
Greater good,
as a whole.
Right. I wouldn't want anyone to think, to leave this podcast thinking that intrinsic motivation is a synonym for selfishness.
Right.
Oh, good
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah.
It's intrinsically motivated. It can be on someone else's behalf,
Right.
like wearing a mask. It doesn't, right? Intrinsic motivation, just because it's inside you, doesn't mean it's about you. And
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Good point.
I think that's a whole other podcast episode, is intrinsic and extrinsic
Sure
motivation.
could be. Yeah. File that away. Did anybody have a quote they were dying to share that we didn't get to share? I don't want to be, abrupt, but I need to start talking about wrapping up 10 minutes before we actually do. I think everybody knows that.
Oh, I'll give you one, because he used to write this letter to the parents when he was still teaching fourth grade. What was taken away from the children's education in order to make them better at taking tests?
Oh, yep.
What was taken away? In this classroom, we used to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but we can't do that anymore because of that. And I think he was one of the first ones that started to make me think. I mean, Bev used to say it, right, that once you've established the environment, 99% of your job is parent education. But I think he really gave me some strategies on how to empower the parents. I feel very fortunate that I learned early in my career that if you could get parents to start being vocal about some of the things that were better to have in a classroom, that was your secret weapon. And I think he motivated me to figure out what it looked like.
Yeah, well said. Because what gets lost is intrinsic motivation, play, process, relationships, all the things that we talk about on this podcast that we absolutely know and science bears out are the most important aspects of the first years of life for healthy human growth. That's what gets lost.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Looking at you, Liz and Emma. Last chance. Anything you wanted to say?
I agree with everything that's been said.
Perfect. Also, to put on our a whole other podcast list, Book It is back in schools, the pizza for reading.
Oh.
And he does talk about that in Punished by Rewards, but I think that's a whole.
How to create a generation of fat kids who hate reading.
Yeah. As much as I love pizza, I was sort of disheartened to see that that's coming back around.
Yes. I also
Okay.
would like to reward Emma for actually getting dressed for this and not wearing her pajamas.
I think
Having a shower and what
this
drying my hair.
prospect
just
of
being
perhaps
wet.
having video released has
If
changed
I had a cook,
everybody.
Dude, I'm about to go get my hair cut. I'm so excited.
Ooh.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I'm still not ready to do that yet, but maybe by the time this one comes out, maybe I'll just shave my head like Richard did and just call that good.
Hey, we could do it on an episode.
Yes,
Yes.
I'll fly to Indiana
it.
and hold the shears.
All right, we'd have to do it out in the yard, though. I can't let you in my house, Richard, for a variety of reasons. And we'll end the podcast on that note. Thank you, everybody. This was
Thanks,
a great
Heather.
conversation.
Thank
It was
you.
fun.
Thank you.
It was
All of you.
thought-provoking. I love it. And thanks, everybody, for listening to another long episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Bye.